Smarter Mobility Africa 2023 is done and dusted. We'll see you next year, 1st to the 3rd of October. As always, Smarter Mobility Africa Summit 2024, here we come. It's great to be here with you today. My name's Ben Pullen and I am the Group Director for Mobility at VUKA Group and Smarter Mobility Africa. So Smarter Mobility Africa, we're all about embracing the new urban era through smarter mobility. And we do this through a number of touch points and platforms throughout the year across Africa, both in person and digitally. And so today you're getting a taste for one of our digital events, which is a webinar focused on the electric mobility hub of Africa and a spotlight on Kenya. So Kenya's been a really interesting country over the last 5, 6, 7 years for e-mobility. It's been a front runner. And today we really want to understand why has that been happening? What have been some of the factors that have contributed towards Kenya being an e-mobility hub? How are things looking today? And then how will this evolve going forward? Is it a sustainable model or is it just a fad? So we've got two great speakers joining us today who have been on the ground, both working in industry and working in research. So they give a great perspective of what we would love to know, which is how has Kenya done it? How can Kenya continue doing it? And what can other cities and countries across Africa take from the learnings to apply it to accelerate their e-mobility journey as well? So first up today, we actually have Isaac Jumba from Mediva, and he's going to be giving us a presentation on a recent study that was conducted to understand user preferences for e-mobility in Kenya. Now, obviously, it's all well and good having great solutions and technologies and innovations and policies and funding, which we would say is on the supply side. But understanding the demand side, the user preferences and trends and needs is a really important factor for any market to develop. So we're very honored to have Isaac with us. I know he's been working very hard with his team over the last few months working on this study. And it's great to be able to have such important stats and insights coming straight to us here at Smarter Mobility Africa. So let me bring Isaac up and we can have a quick catch up with Isaac. Isaac, how are you doing?
I'm well. Thanks so much, Ben, for the invitation to be part of today's conversation.
Brilliant. And where are you based in Kenya?
I'm based out of Nairobi.
Okay, so the real e-mobility hub.
Yes, where a lot of activities are happening at the moment, and I think is what will be happening over also the next couple of years. So really an exciting time for us in this space.
Absolutely. Well, without further ado, I'll hand it over to you so we can get some access to this amazing work that you've been doing over the last few months. Over to you, Isaac.
Thank you so much, Ben. And yeah, really excited to be here to be sharing just some of the work we've been doing in the space. So just to start off about Mediva, so we are a social impact research and design innovation collective. And our work is mostly trying to understand user behavior, user insights, user perceptions with regards to different products and services. And so with this, we are hoping to really help teams be able to unearth and be able to see what products and innovations they can be able to propel forward. So part of our approach to our work in doing research, we are a human-centered design organization. That means we focus a lot on understanding behaviors, we focus a lot on understanding perceptions, we focus a lot on understanding peoples and the environments they lead. And then what we also do, we try a lot to work with these people to understand exactly what interventions would work for them. And then making sure that a lot of the interventions we work are actually more community-centered and a bit agile as well. So we're really keen to see how do we move from just sharing solutions that we think would work to actually sharing solutions that speak to different needs and that at the end of the day can be able to create the big change that we're looking at. So just sharing, going directly into the e-mobility work that we did, just a landscape as well, especially for the Kenyan e-mobility space. So as Ben has mentioned, there's heavy funding already coming into the space, but I think what's lacking is being able to understand with all these products we are trying to put into the market? What's the user perception on that? What's the value they're driving from it? And how are we perceiving clean energy vis-a-vis what our users perceiving? So we did identify that the problem is actually being able to gather information that can be able to really help inform organizations and companies working in this space to be able to build more user-centered products as well. So with that, just a bit of the landscape within the Kenyan e-mobility space, just for context in a larger way. So Kenya has a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emission by 32%. This is by 2030, and it has also committed to invest at least and it has also committed to invest at least 21% to invest from domestic sources to be able to mitigate these gases. And just for context, about 23% of all emissions in Kenya come from the transport sector. So this means if we're able to explore e-mobility solutions in Kenya and be able to really see how we can build out the solutions, then it means there's a higher chance that you can be able to clearly be able to transition into the clean energy space. So sharing a bit around why we focus on the two-wheeler market. So within our research first, we started out by understanding the whole landscape of e-mobility in Kenya. So we looked at the four-wheeler landscape, we looked at the public transport landscape and things like that. And then from there, we wanted to see exactly where the big touch point will be. So we focused on the two-wheeler landscape as opposed to the four-wheeler landscape and the three-wheeler landscape, is because the two-wheeler landscape in Kenya is the largest subsector by importation volume. And then at the moment, given the fuel prices and in Kenya, just the dollar fluctuation value, those are higher. It's a very sensitive sort of space to be in. So with higher petrol fuel prices, then it means there's more needs to explore other alternatives for transportation. And then at the moment, just being able to solve the two-wheeler transport space, there's a big potential to contribute to reducing the greenhouse emission. And what we've seen, again, there's high potential for e-mobility to create employment and opportunities for the communities that work in Kenya. So based on that, our scope mostly was in understanding what are some of the user needs, user perceptions, behaviors with regards to two-wheeler EVs. And the goal of this was to be able to guide the different e-mobility players to be able to deliver more contextual products and services for the Kenyan market. So our ultimate goal for the project was actually to increase the uptake of two-wheeler solutions, this mostly being guided by what the user needs were. So based on this, some of the things we were looking to see was just trying to understand how does the two-wheeler landscape look like, what are some of the users of two-wheeler solutions in Kenya, how does community and culture play a role? And then at the end of it, we have been able to come up with some recommendations that we've already shared with some of the providers and other stakeholders to see what they can be able to do. So based on this, some of the people we did engage, especially for this specific research, we spoke to the different type of e-mobility users. So from EV bike users to motorcycle users, to non-motorized users, to cycling communities. We also spoke to the different solution providers, mostly retailers. We spoke to infrastructure providers. We also talked to different players as well. Also importantly was for us to get input from the different enablers. So these are like financials and also other industry groups. So with this, I'm happy to just share a bit of what we found out. So overall, just within the two-wheeler landscape in Kenya, we have about 188,000 motorcycles which have been bought over the last 5 years. Of course, this number has reduced in terms of importation just the recent years. And as a moment, we have about 3,000 units of EV motorcycles in Kenya. This is an increase of about 1,500 just from August last year. So it means the number is increasing really high. And I think there's a lot more use cases happening at the moment. As per when we were doing the research, we had about 158 stations. These are mostly swapping stations collectively from the two-wheelers and also the three-wheelers as well. And then, again, as by the time we were doing this research, we had about 12 major electric motorcycle direct retailers in Kenya and about 4 electric vehicle retailers in Kenya. So some of the interesting insights we got is actually the importation of motorcycle has been falling greatly since 2021. So this is also an avenue to see how can electric vehicle motorcycle be an opportunity to do that. And I think the reason for this was the dollar exchange rate for the Kenyan shillings and also the average fuel prices and also year-on-year consumer price index among the people that were looking to do this. So with this drastic reduction in importation of normal motorcycles, then there's been an opportunity to see either local assembly for electric vehicles, electric motorcycles, and just another opportunities for electric bicycles to come in. So some additional data as well. Here are some of the models we find out in the ecosystem. So we have players who are doing mobility as a service. We have players who are doing energy as a service. And then you have also players who are doing infrastructure as a service. So these are like charging stations, swapping stations, and all that. What's a bit unique was for a lot of the electric bicycle manufacturers, a lot of them do semi-knockdown. So that means they're able to import a few materials and then locally also be able to assemble some. And then for the electric motorcycles, some of them do complete built units. So they're able to do this locally. And then also some of them are able to do semi-knockdown units. So this is just an ecosystem view of the different players that we do have. We do anticipate more players coming in the next coming years. So we'll be able to share this as this comes along. So in terms of what's really important, which is regards to the consumer who we are looking at. So in terms of the use cases, we did come across 4 use cases of electric two-wheelers. So for food commerce, mostly for local delivery of food, we saw a lot of this in Nairobi for the electric bikes, but more importantly also for the electric motorcycles. We are seeing an increasing number of electric bikes doing short food delivery compared to electric motorcycles. So that means the number might really go high. For taxi services, there's been a lot of pilots for electric motorcycles. We are seeing also an increasing number of leisure and commuting use cases for a lot of electric bikes mostly. And then we're also seeing a lot of other use cases for logistics. So these are like for other areas such as quick commerce, especially for the short distances and things like that. We're seeing a lot of use cases for electric bikes and electric motorcycles. So who did we come across? I'll just highlight high level the different groups of people that we came across using this. So we did come across, just highlight. In terms of the EV bicycle users, we did find a lot of users were engaged for business use. So a lot of these are riders who have been engaged by fleets. What was really interesting about this group, most of them are students and then graduates. So what it means is a lot of these companies are already providing income opportunities for young people who are looking for income opportunities. And I think they are aware of technology. They're leveraging technology to see how they can optimize their delivery. They're leveraging technology to see what areas they can operate, and really they're really keen to see how much income they're making out of it. So I'm mostly using this income to supplement the education or maybe to be able to meet that. And then you also have a couple of other EV users that are individual riders. So what they do is they go acquire and purchase an electric bike, and then they're able to sign up with some of the businesses to be able to provide delivery services. And then we're seeing an increasing number of hobbyists. So these are people that they're part of a community, and over the weekends, they go around riding and connecting, and mostly they're looking to connect with each other. We're seeing a lot of commuters coming up, and an interesting case, we're also seeing what we are calling a bike influencer. So these are basically people who are earning money by promoting, the use cases of bikes. So they're able to share content around electric bikes, and I think they're able to drive uptake. And so they're able to partner with different brands and organizations to be able to drive uptake of electric bikes. And then speaking around electric motorcycles, in Kenya, we have open riders. So these are basically typical IC riders that transport goods and services, and also EV riders. So they're not necessarily signed up with a particular provider, but then they do operate independently. And then we have a majority of people that are under a fleet. So basically they're part of a fleet, and they have a base pay, and then they have some extra earnings. And then we have others at the moment, I think, within the models in Kenya where they actually employed to do this. So they're paid a monthly salary to be able to work as an EV rider. What we found really interesting is a lot of them still have an existing motorcycle at home. And so they're able to balance between the two of them as well. So sharing a bit around the different bios, for a lot of the different profiles we find, a lot of young people who are riding these electric bikes and electric motorcycles are mostly interested in earning income. They're seeing this as a way to, start their life and be able to grow it. What's really interesting about these riders, they're hoping after 1 year or 2 years, their level of impact and the level of earnings can go high. So then that's sort of trying to make sure that even as organizations are providing these electric bikes, they're also thinking about what's the customer life journey of the riders they're working with. How do they provide more opportunities for them to move beyond just delivering goods and services to earning more, to influence in the ecosystem. And then for a typical fleet rider, they're a bit older, so these are probably already existing riders of motorcycles. Their most goal is to support a family. They are repaying loans and things like that. So it means they don't have a lot of choice around what services they can uptake. A lot of that is dictated by the players that they're working on it. Some of the needs that we're seeing coming out a lot from these riders is they still want ways of getting regular income. They want to have more earning opportunities instead of just being regulated by the time they're working in. They are looking for community. They're also looking for career progression. So being able to grow their careers and things like that. They're also looking for flexibility of work. They're looking to have ownership. I think a lot of the models at the moment is they're already part of a fleet, so they don't own the motorcycles or the bike. So some of them are really looking to make sure they have more ownership around that as well. So based on that, I'll just go a bit into understanding some of the data we saw. So what we've seen in Kenya as well, from the people we spoke to of existing IC riders for motorcycles, about 16 of them are considering moving to purchasing electric vehicle. And I think as more and more of them are learning about EVs and their use cases and their cost saving, then a lot of them are now being more open to buying it as well. And then we do have, what we saw is for riders or for users that are closer to where we have infrastructure of EV, they have a more high purchase interest compared to people that are a bit further away. So it means the much closer you are, the much closer interacting with electric vehicles or electric motorcycles, the much interested you're in, and then the much chances of you being able to generate an interest of acquiring it. So in Kenya, we do have specific centers that have really well built out infrastructure for EVs. So we got found that users close to those areas have a higher affinity to purchase compared to people that are a bit far away from that. Speaking around purchase consideration, at the moment, cost and reliability still remain big factors when some of the potential users are thinking about purchasing EVs. So there's still that assumption that the costs are really high. The current models for either financing are still not very flexible to them. For some of them that already own IC motorcycles, they see it as a challenge and they're still servicing loans, they still see it as a challenge to be able to acquire an EV, and they don't have ways of even disposing the existing EC. What's also really interesting, for a lot of players and service providers working in this space, they sort of communicate, environmental concern or environmental gain as part of their value proposition to the users. But we did find out that for most users, environmental concern is least of their concern in terms of trying to see if they're considering to purchase an EV or not. So the other things that are more high of a priority compared to I want to get an EV because it does not pollute the environment. So really interesting to see the different dynamics and what's coming in as well. Things such as range anxiety is still an issue. Things such as performance is an issue. A lot of people who are trying to use electric motorcycles still want to have the same feel and functionality and possibilities as an existing IC motorcycle. So trying to see how does that sort of change of perception of functionality, either inhibit or enable uptake of EVs. And lastly, thinking about in terms of user perceptions, majority of, again, existing IC riders have low technical awareness around the functionality of the EVs. So maybe that's something to look at. And then in Kenya, we're seeing actually an increasing number of female riders, which is a really good thing, but there's still issues such as road safety, social stereotypes that are really coming in along the way. So it means there's still more for us to do in terms of just not delivering the services, but also thinking around where are these electric bike used, where are these electric motorbikes used, how are we designing to make sure that every people of every gender in every scenario can be able to uptake. So there's still a lot more for companies and organizations to do along the whole value chain compared just to selling the electric bikes. What we also saw is at the moment, the people who are riding EVs earn considerably higher than the people who are riding a typical IC. So there's a bit much more. And in terms of an average cost per kilometer, we find out that those who are riding an electric EV save at least 6 times the cost compared to the people that ride a typical existing motorcycle. And then at the moment, for existing users, they prefer swapping over point charging. But then for people that are not using, they would feel like point charging will work better. So there's also a bit of that perception. I think from use, I think swapping is coming in as an increasing use case for flexibility on that. So it's really interesting to see how players are thinking around deploying this further. And lastly, thinking about enablers and barriers to uptake. So biggest enablers for uptake of electric bicycles and motorcycles. For electric bicycles, we've seen peer referrals and networks. So these are really big factor. As you see your friend riding an electric bike, then there's a higher chance that you may get interested. We're also seeing the retrofitting industry coming up. So ideally, for existing bicycles and all that, because of the cost element, we're seeing a lot of other players coming in to see what retrofitting might look like. And that's also helping people to try out bikes without a bigger thing. And then we're also seeing flexible and accessible financing within the market also being an uptake. In terms of for electric motorcycles, high fuel cost has been an enabler. So a lot of people have been deciding to go to EV because of the high fuel cost for the existing ICs. In Kenya, we do have a lot of fleet programs that are really working well. And I think within that push, since they have already a design model of earning, a design model of working, clear earning approaches for the riders, then it's sort of like helping uptake a bit more. And still also peer networks and referrals and communities are a big thing. In terms of barriers, high cost is still a challenge. Product limitation and ability for customers to customize their products and services. At the moment, users really don't have a choice of the solutions that are available in the market. So they're only able to choose what's been provided by the provider. So it's also really interesting to see how do users take part in like product design and things like that. There's still a lot of challenge in terms of access to information about EVs in the market. So hopefully as you go along, there could be more opportunities for that. For motorcycles, I think EV motorcycles, there's still negative perceptions around range, around load capacity, around, so there's a lot of that that's still happening. And then in Kenya also, a lot of the people that you are targeting to take these EVs are still servicing loans, and so they still don't know how to go about that as well. And to finish off for today's presentation, I think we're just looking at what could be areas players can look into. So I think expanding consumer choice is one thing. So at the moment, you're only able to take the variety of EV bikes and EV motorcycles that are available. So engaging more consumers to understand what design considerations would work best for them could be a good thing to look at. In Kenya, we're seeing the rise of quick commerce. And so trying to see how can EV bikes and motorcycles tap into that market, and how can these companies collaborate with those organizations to explore that market? How can we surface more fleet programs in other industries besides the food industry and things like that? I think there's a case for innovative financing. Just try to explore who are the people we are targeting and how can we refine financing in a way that suits their needs. There's an element of tapping into communities that already exist to drive uptake. One big other area is to be able to skills and technical capacity building within the ecosystem. So at the moment, there's still a lot of skill gaps if you're thinking around getting technical assistance around EV and where to do repairs, how to access the spare parts and things like that. So I think as more and more we build data on that, then it could be good. And then lastly, just being able to leverage data and technology to be able to gather more data around the use cases to be able to inform how this would look like. So I think I'd like to pause it there, Ben, just for context and for time. And yeah, just open up the discussions as we go along on what we could discuss a bit more, and happy to share more insights as we go along.
Brilliant, Isaac. Thank you very much for such an insightful presentation there with loads of understanding, I think, of what's caused some of the transition towards being an e-mobility hub, and also what some of the challenges and enablers are as we go forward. So why don't we bring Miraj Desai in for a discussion, and he'll be able to provide not only some understanding on the user side, demand side, but also what's been happening from a supply side as well. So if I could bring in Miraj Desai and welcome you to join us. How are you doing today?
Hey, Ben, how's it going?
Very well, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. So it sounds like you've been doing a lot over the last few years to innovate and enable the market to move forward, and focusing, as I understand, on charging infrastructure from your side. So maybe if you want to give a quick introduction on what it is you do at Chargy.
Yeah, sure. Isaac, thanks so much for that brilliant presentation, by the way. Right, I'm Miraj Desai. I'm the part of the team building Chargy. What we're currently doing and working on is creating energy and charging solutions to cater towards a very evolving and changing mobility space over the next couple of years. we see ourselves as key enablers for the industry, and by building more bespoke products to answer the very bespoke nature of the e-mobility market in Africa per se. So yeah, we started off in Kenya. Part of our mission is to localize the production of charging infrastructure to, again, maybe more importantly, reduce the capex and opex nature of charging infrastructure, which is one of the constraints of the market of e-mobility, but also charging infrastructure itself. Thanks.
Thanks, Miraj. So maybe let's start on that point now that you've joined the discussion, looking at the infrastructure side. So Isaac highlighted that there's, say, limited choice for products, mainly on the vehicle side. But how's it looking from a charging perspective? You know, in terms of whether it's swapping stations or charging points, is this currently a limitation for the end users?
Yeah, sure. I guess let me look at it through the lens of the current market landscape. So we've seen a high prevalence of companies doing swapping here in Kenya. There seems to have been a push factor by the initial companies entering this space and being supported by some form of development capital to launch and conceptualize these frameworks. I think Isaac clearly mentioned a very interesting point in the limitations of a potential swapping solution, i.e., the availability of certain swap stations, but also the extent at which the company has to incorporate that swapping station infrastructure on their balance sheet, and it becoming a potential scaling issue in the future where that company has to perpetually raise as the number of bikes they sell increases. So this is what I mean by the scalability concepts, and also the fragmentation issue, which Isaac mentioned. Without cooperation in the industry, which isn't there currently, each user is limited or restricted to the swap network of that particular bike company. This high fragmentation is something quite interesting because you see a lot of new companies also entering this space with a similar model, creating further fragmentation and further scalability issues within that framework. So that's that. On the point charging side that we are activated in, we're limited by the number of point charging entities, point charging OEMs currently, but we see this changing in the future, where the influx of a dominant market in India and China starts exploring new territories in Africa with competing products at competing prices, start entering the market. So, I think part of the concept or part of my introduction was focused around how rapidly the e-mobility market is changing because of the influx of new capital, specifically over the last few years in battery technology, charging technology, and how this changes the landscape and offers new business models to play. So it's exciting to see how that persists over the next 2 years per se.
Absolutely. And when you talk of new entrants to the market from India and China, is that mainly on the vehicle side and the battery side? Or is that
could be both,
on the charging
could be
infrastructure
both
as well?
segments, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of OEMs particularly have been developing bikes with large economies of scale benefits, potentially, engineering efficiency benefits. So this is going to be exciting to see how that potentially plays an influence, especially since Africa has been influenced largely by Indian manufacturers over historically through the likes of Bajaj and TVS. But also on the charging side, I think it'll be exciting because over in those two regions itself, there's over, in India itself, there's 150 startups within this space. So how does that impact the entry into the market? But obviously a very evolving space. And I think Isaac once mentioned, what are the incentives for local producers? and local manufacturers that protect these entities, which I believe we'll get into later. But
yeah. So let's hold that point around new entrants and future, and we'll also pick up on cooperation, I think, at the end of the call. But let's perhaps just take one step back again and zoom out. What have you seen as some of the tailwinds, some of those factors that have contributed over the last 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years to get Kenya to where it is today, which seems to be a booming e-mobility hub?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question. A question that many people consider is, why has Kenya seen so much advancement in this space? I think one of the key propellers of this space, as a catalyst, has been the amount of finance that has come into Kenya. Again, Kenya has been a very attractive hub and bed for innovation historically, and a huge testing ground for new technologies across the continent. And therefore, initial startups have focused their efforts in Kenya to commercialize, test, pilot their ideas. And in support of this is the additional finance, not only through on an equity and debt side, but also on a grant basis, which has seen companies allowed to commercialize their ideas rapidly through that grant support. And there has been a large focus from grant providers specifically on the Kenyan region. If you look at historically the call for proposals, target regions that have existed. So that's also propelled Kenya as a regional hub.
But
Along
is
with the
there a
finance.
figure that Isaac or yourself, Miraj, is aware of in terms of how much funding has been allocated into e-mobility in the last 5 to 10 years? Is there a rough figure or a known figure that we could be aware of?
I believe Isaac might have that figure. I understand it's over 50, 60 million right now, which is one of the highest in the continental within Africa. But Isaac can have more information on that.
Yeah, we'd love to know, Isaac, if you've got any numbers in terms of how much has been invested, whether debt, equity, grant funding. What does this pot look like?
Yeah, let me just, I'll share that out probably before the end of the call. But yeah, I think as Miraj has mentioned, quite a number, over 60. And also depending on the infrastructure side. So I think also the public transport infrastructure, I think the investment is quite huge. And then also the two-wheeler and the two-wheeler landscape also, it's also increasing as well. So, but yeah, a big of it is, I think, in the form of debt capital at the moment, yeah.
And that funding, is that across the board? So that would be into, say, electric bus manufacturing, any charging infrastructure projects, two-wheelers, and so on. Yeah. Great.
So, sorry, I guess that was one of the tailwinds mentioned. I guess it's worth also mentioning, besides Kenya being a hub of innovation historically, the prevailing macros and energy story in Kenya is also a significant tailwind to the growth of the e-mobility in Kenya. I think considering the energy landscape, above 80 or 90% is currently renewable. Kenya has excess generation capacity as well. A unique story across the African continent, of course. And therefore, potentially that was another contributing factor as to why Kenya has been chosen as a region for development of technologies within Africa. In terms of the macros, a common story told across the continent is the inflationary pressure through currency depreciation. And currency depreciation, one of the major contributing factors is a large amount of the contribution going to oil. And therefore, Kenya is also suffers the same problem as many African countries do. So, and that ultimately linked to inflationary pressure in the market as well,
And you were
affecting a large.
in Ethiopia, if I'm not mistaken.
I was,
Which is
yes.
the country that has obviously recently put a ban on, I believe, imports of internal combustion engines. So, what are you seeing there that might, resemble some of the challenges and opportunities that Kenya face from that inflationary pressure on currency?
Yeah, Ethiopia, what a wild, wild west of a market, but such an interesting and intriguing place to visit. Ethiopia's decision to ban the import of combustion vehicles, stems around their huge problem around foreign currency, I believe. Currently, the restrictions on foreign currency access for businesses and limitations on foreign currency repatriation creates a very difficult environment to do business. You're looking at a different official rate versus a black market rate, which is almost double, which goes again to signify the challenges that the country faces. Now, similar to Kenya, Ethiopia has a conducive environment for energy production in the geothermal space, but also the hydro space, which they have captured and taken advantage of in investment, and therefore has created an energy surplus situation. And therefore, Ethiopia's narrative or directive is to transition using these favorable features and therefore impact the macros that prevail within the country. A similar story to Kenya, I would say.
And when we look at Kenya and oil as an import, do we know the dollar figure that is each year, and where oil features as a commodity? Does it sit at the top as the highest value commodity imported, or are there other numbers to be aware of?
Off the top of my head right now, I can't pull that data out for you. I understand in Ethiopia, the number is about $6 billion US per year.
That's a lot. When you compare that to the 60 million invested into e-mobility in Kenya versus a 6 billion import of a commodity.
Yeah.
Isaac, are you aware of the oil import figures from a cost perspective to the country?
No, may not have that data with me now.
No worries. If we've not got it, I think it's a great question for everyone to Google at home as well, and something that we'll all be aware of, because I think, cash is king and numbers certainly talk. So then you spoke about the macro, the energy perspective. So there's a macro level driving the decision makers to take decisions that will influence the economy in the right way. How might that surplus renewable energy power translate down to the end user? Are they seeing certain types of tariffs? Are they seeing, in general, just a lot lower energy cost?
Well, certainly on the prevalence of the macro features then pushes the government to then promote more conducive policies within the environment to promote e-mobility. So one of those particular policies has been Kenya Power and the Energy Regulation Board of Kenya to implement a specific e-mobility tariff. This tariff has been significantly reduced, especially on the time of use format being the evenings, where Kenya is producing a lot of geothermal energy, which is not being utilized. Therefore, the time of use aspect being almost half the cost for the daily use to promote e-mobility on the continent. That is a significant incentive, I would say, within the context of promoting e-mobility on the continent, and another tailwind that we've seen, exemplary of Kenya's commitment to enhance, to catalyze this space to solve some of the larger macro challenges that exist.
So we've discussed financing, we've discussed energy from a macro and an end user perspective. Are there any other key tailwinds, key driving factors that we've seen over the last few years that have contributed to Kenya being this e-mobility hub?
Besides the financing, I guess I'll add one more, and potentially Isaac can come in after. I think it's the financing, the innovative financing mechanisms that certain companies have been able to provide to support the affordability of assets from the user side. So we're looking at companies like Watu and Copper, who have really created innovative financing mechanisms to ensure that the high capex cost and the benefits of the TCO are incorporated over a large period, and whatever financing mechanisms are applied thereafter can increase the adoption of e-mobility. So I think that's played a significant.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had Watu on last month on the Smarter Mobility Africa webinar, and they did talk around how disconnecting the battery from the end user purchase decision helped to reduce some of the financing costs. So I wondered if you'd seen that being an opportunity, and how that might play out going forward, as it's, say, roughly a third of the cost of the bike, if not more.
I think Isaac might be better placed for that. Isaac, do you want to give that a go?
Yes. So maybe just to add on to that, Ben, I think what's also we're seeing is this now more on the demand side, I think, is for the users of, like, the potential users of these sort of solutions. So one, I think we are seeing a rise of a whole different profiles. I think initially when you talk about electric motorcycle users, these were like, people who are a bit illiterate and things like that. What you're seeing in the market is actually like these are professionals. So that means, the ability of them be able to adopt technology and data and some of these approaches that are being sort of piloted out by these service providers also allows for that to happen. I think also it's the dynamics of the market. We have a young population, so any opportunities that open up, earning opportunities or income opportunities for these sort of people, I think there's a bit of that. And I think in relation to that, also we have to look at the intersection of e-mobility and other industries, as you say. So a good example, we've seen the rise of quick commerce, where we have a lot of small businesses are running and things like that, and they need to do instant delivery and things like that, and they don't need to tap into longer delivery ecosystems and things like that. So that means smaller players can be able to set up smaller logistic services within that sort of form and entity. So then that sort of provides avenues for uptake. And then we're also seeing a lot of, again, collaboration of these providers. So it's easy for if I'm a fleet provider to be able to talk to, again, the solution provider, be able to talk to financing provider. So I think a lot of players are coming in, not necessarily the very technical one. And I think that allows for on the demand side to increase a bit more of the consumption as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Isaac. And then in terms of, we don't want to shine too much of a spotlight on the world's biggest pandemic in the last 100 years, but what might that pandemic have done to accelerate the e-mobility space in Kenya, if anything? Did it hold it back?
I think the pandemic definitely accelerated the function of delivery services across the globe in each and every single sector. I think it changed user perception around accessing, delivery services. More people were accessing delivery services. So, these delivery services were run by motorbikes, and therefore, with motorbikes and three-wheelers being the first level of assets being converted to electric, or the first potential level of assets being converted to electric on the continent, I think that particularly had a role, to transition or accelerate the transition to e-mobility on the continent. I think that's my take there.
Yeah, good to know.
And I think, yeah, just adding on that, again, I think we're seeing a lot of increase again for last mile delivery, both in the urban areas, but also way beyond the rural areas. And I think a lot of players are winning by, being cost effective, being efficient, so that all sort of the things that, again, at the end of the day, consumers are looking for, affordability, convenience, trust, and things like that. And so I think some of these behaviors were mostly enforced, during the COVID, the pandemic came in and, allowed users to see the ability for them to do this. So I think leveraging a lot of that learnings, also other businesses are really keen to win over the markets. And I think e-mobility solutions play a critical role, in last mile delivery and other avenues of helping businesses thrive as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like success breeds success, learnings breeds learnings. And it's, from your slides, Isaac, you showed that the word of mouth referral was a big driver of e-mobility adoption, which just goes to show if it's working, it will work some more in the future, and the adoption will increase. So we've looked quite a lot at the demand side. Thank you for your contributions there. Let's have a look at some of the supply sides. We've seen many headlines over the last few years Rome is raising this amount. Bazigo secures an additional $3 million. They're just two companies that pop to mind. VUKA attended the Africa's Green Economy Summit last month in Cape Town, which is our sister event, and pitched their e-bike solution. So it seems like a lot of supply side has popped up, a lot of companies manufacturing product, building solutions, building services, and really going for it in Kenya. So what's the story behind that? Why are they so interested to launch a business and scale it in Kenya?
Miraj, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Interesting. I feel like I do maybe go first in talking about something I mentioned early on, with Kenya being the particular hotbed for innovation, testing out new technologies, especially since we have such a large bike population in the market, and also a successful delivery businesses all around. Apart from this, there's the power conditions. Generally, the narrative in Africa has been that new technologies are tested out. I think within Kenya itself, we look at mobile money. Now mobility is the next referenced example to that. Isaac mentioned the prevalence of very high fuel prices, which has been certainly one contributing factor to a lot of people considering and testing out new models, especially commercial actors, fleet operators, testing out these new models with e-mobility. And then just to answer your question on the supply side, I mentioned it before and I'll mention it again because this has been a contributing factor. Certainly, finance companies who have come in have really pushed the growth of e-mobility in Africa, certainly for individual players, but also for fleet operators. These banks who have mandated targets for sustainable mobility as part of their priority strategic targets. Players like Watu Credit, Copper, Mopo. But more importantly, the companies itself. I guess I'll have to. I just want to think about it. Something that it's worth discussing over this call right now is, why is Kenya such an attractive environment? We'll see a lot of companies coming to Kenya now. We're looking at Spiro, who's got large growth targets across Kenya now. We're looking at maybe 2 or 3 new companies potentially in the pipeline, hoping to expand to Kenya with similar battery swapping models, I would say, indifferentiable models. But what makes Kenya that attractive space before those aforementioned factors?
Yeah, I think there's a good 100 or more people on the webinar that are also really keen to know that question as well. So I wondered, Isaac, if you've got any insights for that. Why, what does make Kenya so attractive right now? Why would Spiro consider entering? Why do entrepreneurs take the risk to build something, with an uncertain future?
Actually, there are 2 perspectives to that. One is, again, at this moment, you're still like at the pilot and testing phase for a lot of different players. So I think what we might see is probably some players might win it big, some necessarily may not. I think the issue again becomes on who's uptaking these solutions that we're trying to build. Are we targeting already people that have been served? So we're seeing a lot of, a good example is we've seen models where, we're having, again, providers sell to already existing owners of motorcycles, right? And so the question becomes, are we seeing like a new potential market for users? Are we seeing a new potential use cases? So I think what we see from what I've looked at is, again, we are seeing other markets, like other industries really coming up. So there could be a use case for like e-mobility for like, in the health space. There could be a use case of this in like quick commerce. So I think there's potentially going to be more use cases for this. And a lot of this is also like informed by a lot of the behaviors of consumers in Kenya and what the future might look like of consumption and things like that. But I think beyond that, it's still early on testing. From the research you've talked about, everyone is trying potentially the same model. There's a bit of, again, segregation of there's a bit of siloed nature of approaches, and everyone's trying to still keep their cards close. So I think we might see a bit of changes around these models are workable, these models are scalable, and things like that. So maybe still the early testing phase, and maybe within this, from what we learn from here, it can now be taken into the other markets as well.
Yeah, we've got just about 15 more seconds on this topic, Miraj, if you wanted to add anything, and then we'll just want to move on to some policy discussion very quickly.
Yeah, sure. The financing ecosystem. I think entrepreneurs consider Kenya's financing ecosystem as superior, potentially with the story of market size available as well, not only within Kenya, but also the regional markets as well. So the attraction around setting up, deploying, testing, scaling technologies within Kenya is an attractive one in also potentially raising capital as well because of the market size per se. Therefore, contributing to the factor where a lot of companies are potentially testing out their products in Kenya. But as Isaac mentioned, the question is there huge differentiability between these technologies, and what now happens a couple of years down the line where certain companies will win it big and certain companies won't. So that's just on the financing side, I think.
Great.
The ecosystem around.
We'll be moving to Q&A very, very shortly, but I just wanted to touch on policy because I don't think we've been there yet. But what's happening from the policy side? What are national governments doing? What are city municipality governments doing to enable this? Have they been taking any action that's contributed towards this growth?
I'll start off from my sector, and I'll let Isaac bridge in on the energy and charging side. I think it's the particular preferential tariffs that Kenya Power and the Regulation Authority has approved and authorized, which has been a welcome intervention, welcome policy intervention to promote the sector. So that's one that I can speak about. Isaac, on your side.
Brilliant. And I'll just remind the audience just very briefly, Q&A is coming up in just a couple of minutes. So if you want to share your questions in the chat box that you can see there, and then we'll start bringing those questions up. Over to you, Isaac. What policy has made a difference?
Yes, I think there's still a lot of progress. I think from what I've seen with the government and other development agencies, there's an e-mobility task force that's going on. So really keen to put in place policies that are supporting a lot more of uptake. We also have incentives for players. So I think encouraging more local assembly. So that's why we're seeing a lot of semi-knockdown units, importing very small units and trying to do if you can build more of local assembly as well. So I think within that, there are some things which are really encouraging more uptake in terms of incentives, but also a lot of investment and support from the players and other development agencies in driving a lot of conversations on e-mobility. I think we had the climate summit happening last year, which is a big push in terms of some of the goals. So I think there's specific goals that, again, the government wants to achieve by 2030. So I think that's also driving a lot of investment and conversations on the same.
Brilliant. There was actually a question that came up around policy. So I'll just see if we can get that up now. But I think, the audience is quite keen to understand a bit more. So we could continue just unpacking that briefly if there are any other thoughts on the policy side.
I think the protectionist measures put in place, especially on the VAT, the exercise duty. I believe currently Kenya has certain requirements that need to be upheld in order to be exempt from the VAT. A certain percentage of local procurement that is required for that particular entity to be qualified for that VAT exemption. I believe that's one particular policy which is going to play a role in a lot of assembly, local content pop-ups in Kenya, which again answers potentially your question of what happens in the future for Kenya. That's one very important policy update that I'm aware of, and I've spoken to various players within the space about.
Brilliant. We've got a question here from Abhishek, and this is directed to Isaac, actually, based on your presentation. Would you be able to talk a little bit more about subsidy provided by government for EVs in Kenya And then how easy or difficult is it to get a bank loan for purchasing EVs in Kenya?
Yeah, so I think within the first one, so definitely I think we are seeing more from the policy side in terms of like regulations around importation of EVs and in terms of like what the government is doing around that. So I think there's still an ongoing task force on that, and I think recommendations of that will be shared out soon. But as Miraj has mentioned, there's VAT exemptions on some areas, but then you also have to meet a bit of other local requirements we're seeing. In terms of financing, there are like really interesting models that work already. So for EVs, we are seeing other players who are already like involved in financing for motorcycles previously, whether they are ICs before, also coming into this space and trying to see what models they can do. So a lot of times, I think they're able to access financing from like debt financing from development agencies and big banks, and then they're able to like design models that work with the normal sort of riders and things like that. I think the challenge with that we've seen for some of these providers, they've had a challenge with repayments and things like that to do with like riders and everything else. And as we've shared out, there's also that sort of like anxiety. So you're already servicing an existing loan. How might you take up another loan to do that? So there's still space to like explore other innovative financing models for that. But yeah, there definitely exists a lot of players that are doing that, and there's still more to be done. I think that works for a particular customer segment. So these are like riders who exhibit this behavior. But I think if you're targeting a different profile of riders and maybe trying to go into quick commerce and other markets, models of financing might change more. It could be like more of a revenue share model and things like that. So I think we are seeing other players also testing out different models. So we'll be capturing this data and sharing that as we go along.
Great. We've got a question here from Maud. When mapping the e-mobility players in Kenya, what is the opinion on room for multiple companies driving versus having a winner takes it all? So is this going to be an oligopoly or a monopoly market, or is there space for many different players? Miraj, perhaps as someone hustling to build a business, how do you see this?
I can start.
Isaac, let me try and answer this question first. I think this has been a very interesting question. I mean, across the sector, I think financing, he who can acquire most financing at this stage through his storytelling, his or her storytelling, has seen potential wins in the market. Isaac mentioned a couple of players falling out. These couple of players who are going to fall out is going to be likely the companies who have tried to scale a model, received initial capital, but part of their essential core business requires further capital raise. And without an indifferentiable model, I think there's going to be a lack of potential raise thereafter in the second round, subsequent rounds thereafter, and those companies are going to fall out. So winner takes all. I think, in this stage where a lot of the financing has been, a lot of the innovation in this space has been to some extent subsidized, we've seen subsidized innovation in this space. If companies can continue financing this revolution, he who accesses the most amounts of finance potentially wins. But then the question is, at what point is that sustainable, which I believe we may discuss later.
That's really interesting.
Isaac, your thoughts?
Miraj, and actually we've only got a minute left. I wish there was a later. We might have to set up another discussion to expand on some of the points, but it's a really good place to end. We'll bring Isaac back in as well. But yeah, looking to the future, we've seen this boom. There's been the buzz. There's been a lot of grant funding and debt financing and some nice investment rounds that have happened, and we're all aware of them because we've read the articles, seen the headlines. But what you're saying, Miraj, is that the future is not certain, and actually, can this funding flow, capital flow, continue for all of the players that currently exist today? It's a really interesting point. How sustainable is this market? Isaac, what are your thoughts on going forward? The sustainability of this growth and development that's happened. Is it a fad, or are we going to see continuous growth over the next 5 years?
I think I'll just build on what Miraj has mentioned. Financing is a big aspect, and so if the players are trying to come in at a unique model, at a unique angle, at it, how easy is it for them to access this financing? Definitely, there's gonna be need for players to integrate with each other. Like, I think to win it all as well, because again, if we're dealing with similar consumers and things like that, there has to be a lot of intersection on that. But yeah, there's space for even other players to come in, probably like playing in a different sort of space, maybe supporting services offered by these sort of players. But it's still a risk to see how that market might go as well. Yeah.
Great. Well, look, guys, we could honestly talk for another hour. We already had a great chat earlier this week, but we are going to have to wrap it up there. I just want to give apologies from one of our speakers who couldn't make it. Herman from GIZ is actually in Kampala this week and was just not able to join the call from some of the site visits and stakeholder engagement that he's doing. But how exciting! He's in Kampala. He's continuing the great work that he's been doing in Kenya and other parts of Africa, and it just seems like many countries are moving forward. Miraj, you've been in Ethiopia and are aware of what's happening in different countries. So great to see. We'll leave it there. Just want to say thank you so much for your time, guys. I'm really looking forward to continuing this discussion with you. The chat is still open in the webinar channel, and we'll be sharing this video on YouTube, our YouTube channel, very soon. So the comments can continue. I think there are a lot of questions that we haven't been able to put forward that you can answer in there as well. Best of luck with the work that you're doing, and we'll see you guys very soon. Right, so just before you guys go at home and in your offices, I did want to tell you that although the webinar is finished now, it's not the end for the year. We have a webinar each month, as I'm sure you're aware by now, takes place at the end of each month on a different topic. Not only is there a monthly webinar, we actually have the annual Smarter Mobility Africa Summit that takes place on the 1st to the 3rd of October, 2024. It's in its 6th year of running. It's Africa's Smarter Mobility event, and it's all about embracing the new urban era through Smarter Mobility Africa. Now, there's an early bird that's running right now, and that will get you a really nice discount to reward you for your early commitment to this amazing event, and that runs until the 20th of April. So head over to our website. The team will put that in the chat now, and the tickets page. You can basically register your interest for the ticket you're interested in, and then one of our team will be in touch just to tell you a bit more about the program from a content perspective, but also a bit more about all the different elements that are taking place: site visits, networking, gala dinner, test drives and rides of vehicles, and then different conference stages as well. So there's lots to look forward to. It's an event that pulls together the whole African ecosystem in mobility. So please do join if you are working in mobility or you are working in and around the area. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate you joining. As I mentioned before, this video will be shared on YouTube, our YouTube channel, so we can definitely continue the discussion around this particular topic, which has garnered so much interest. Africa's e-mobility hub, shining a spotlight on Kenya. Thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you soon.